Good morning. Today is Tuesday, March 9th. It's 10 a.m. and this is the first half of the morning session for Senate Natural Resources and Energy. We're following up on our ongoing work on weatherization. Now at long last, I can use the bill number. We've had a draft for a while, S109, which formally got referred to our committee today. And as part of that work, over so-called town meeting week break, I was in touch with Ms. Cheney and Mr. Nauer at the PUC and asked them if they would look at our draft version and offer some analysis, and followed up with them again yesterday. And they've been kind enough to help us, since we are on a tight schedule, to come back to us and bring some language. You know, it's always a bit of a back and forth. We're looking for assistance in a particular way, but they have a a different window to look out onto the world through a regulatory way of regarding things. So it's always helpful for us to make sure we're expressing what we're looking for help for in a manner that actually fits with their way of taking on that work. So long story short, I asked them if they could help us draft language and come to the committee, and they've done so. So thank you very much for jumping right in and coming back to us with language on for S109. And I'll just pause there, see if there are any committee questions, because we did do quite a bit of work on the bill through different meetings on town meeting week. And I just want to make sure before we go ahead, everyone's kind of in sync with where we're going. Okay, great. So with that, good morning, Ms. Cheney, Mr. Nauer, thanks again. Good to see you. We'd love to see the language you prepared at our request, and let's discuss it.
Commissioner, you're
I'm
muted.
making Tom a co-host. I'm sorry, I was posting a document. I'll be right there. Sorry.
Okay.
If I can get there.
Okay.
Shall I talk while that's happening? I'll just say good morning to everybody. Thank you for having us. The draft that Chair Bray was referring to was the original draft. I understand there's a strike all, and it was just shared with us in the last half hour, so I haven't had a chance to read it. But as Senator Bray said, he did ask us to come up with a charge to the PUC that would be clearer than, well, as clear as possible. And so we've brought our suggestion, and it's quite short and we think instrumental regarding a proceeding that would be undertaken by the Public Utility Commission. And before we share the language, I'll just preamble it by saying that we think this would clarify what we would deliver to you by December 17th of this year. And we see it as an opportunity to keep the ball moving so that the framework would be in place for expanded thermal resources and programs, and applying lessons that we've learned in the regulated arena. So things would be in place for if and when those resources do become available or more robust. And so it's a narrow but vital set of questions in our opinion. For example, it would specify, we would recommend criteria for establishing the amount of a future charge, the size of potential budgets, which entity or entities would deliver services, but most importantly, this would be within the framework of existing statute. And if there were any statutory tweaks necessary to effectuate this, the most efficient delivery of services, we would recommend those to you as well. So with that, I'd like to turn to Tom Nauer, who is our policy director, our chief economist, and the lead author of the two Act 62 reports that you received last year in this January. So he can explain that in greater detail. And who is going to put up the language for you to see, or do you have it?
I have it up, so I will do my best to share my screen.
Okay. And before you go, Mr. Nauer, so Ms. Cheney, thanks so much for that helpful preamble to help set the context. And let me add a little more context to remind the committee. So although we're looking into how such a construct would be put up, a thermal energy efficiency charge, I just want to remind everyone, this is not the only tool in our toolkit for raising money. We already have the low-income weatherization program that runs on the existing fuel taxes, and we've been taking testimony on things like to-the-meter programs, and we're looking at bonding, et cetera. So I just want to reassure those who think maybe the only note in on our instrument is a tax. It's not. There's a lot of things going on, but we want to be ready next year if this becomes one of the tools in the toolkit that we deploy. So with that, Mr. Nauer, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. For the record, my name is Tom Nauer. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes. Okay.
So the way that I was thinking of this and trying to be helpful to the committee is to think about a new thermal energy efficiency charge as the analogy to what we have for the regulated utility world. In Title 30, Section 209, we've got existing statutory authority to implement the energy efficiency charge for electric and natural gas programs. Section 209D3B provides the commission with a long list of standards and criteria for it to consider in determining what's the right size of budgets for the regulated efficiency utilities. And so the way that we've thought about this is there an analogous program that we can do for the unregulated fuels? And so this language is trying to set up the criteria or to investigate the criteria and make recommendations to this committee and whatever other committees you choose on what those criteria ought to be for establishing a thermal efficiency charge. So hopefully this language is clear and accomplishes that goal under the first bullet point. Again, we're recommending criteria that would be used in determining what the right amount of the charge would be. The second point, we're looking at the appropriate entities to use those funds to implement thermal efficiency programs and any statutory amendments that would be necessary to implement our recommendations.
Great. Can you talk to us a little bit about sometimes I think when people hear that we have regulated and unregulated fuels, that it's like two worlds apart, but so that in some way, if we were to propose this for so-called unregulated fuels, we're treading into territory that we, in some people's judgment, maybe shouldn't be in. But I'm just trying to understand from when we talk about regulated and unregulated, we're talking about price, right? I mean, there are the quote unquote delivered fuels that we're talking about, heating fuel. They're still regulated, but it's just they're not regulated for price. Is that, I'm just trying to see how hard the wall is between these two terms.
Well, so there are definitions of regulated and unregulated in Title 30, and I don't have them memorized, so I'm not going to try to recite them for you now. But yeah, regulated by the PUC. I have no doubt that the delivered fuels that people use to heat their homes are regulated in any number of ways, but they're not regulated by the PUC. The fuels like electricity and natural gas are regulated by the PUC for price, as you say, and also, things like quality of service is very important.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great, thank you. Any committee questions about the language or the intent or how this might be used?
So I guess the only thing I would say is I know there have been several conversations during town meeting week with colleagues and others. And is this sort of an agreed upon path forward?
Yeah, so thank you for that. I didn't go into it completely because it would be a long aside, but on the basis of those conversations during town meeting week, meetings with the pro tem, with other chairs, with other senators, where those, I think my hope is that we've addressed those concerns successfully in the strike all that we'll go through today. But for instance, perhaps the biggest one in relation to this is we were proposing to stand up the thermal energy efficiency charge and simply, we're really relabeling the existing fuel taxes as thermal energy efficiency charges. So that goes away. And I think the legitimate concern about that was, why would you start down the road to that construct without having yet defined the program that would use the proceeds perhaps in a different way? That seemed like a fair concern to me. So we weren't really using it yet. We were just starting ourselves in that direction, sort of getting a toe in the door maybe. We don't need to do that. There's no loss in functionality to delay that until we have a full program to present to our colleagues next year. But meanwhile, what we've all recognized is we don't know precisely how we would implement that. And that's what we're asking the PUC to help us with in terms of these particular aspects of such a program. It leaves us with plenty of homework to do, but this will be an important piece of having a plan next year. Okay. Well, great. So this is it's concise, to the point, and clear. So thank you very much for bringing that across. Let me just check with the committee. Unless hearing no objections, I would propose that when Ellen prepare our next draft, that we replace the old PUC language with what we have here. If people find further edits to make, we'll make them then this week with the goal of voting this bill out on Thursday. But any concerns about adopting this language for now and moving it into the bill, replacing the old PUC language? Okay, so hearing none. Senator Westman.
I just want to say I'm fine with replacing the old language with it now. I'm still not sure how I feel about this.
Sure. So noted. I get it. Thank you. Right. Okay, great. And Ellen is Ms. Schakowsky's on the call, so I'm sure she caught that. Okay. I had also asked you, with very little lead time, a couple questions. Sorry, the bill is actively in development. So I don't know if you, as part of, for instance, like the Act 62 proceedings, already spent a little time looking at a to the meter pays-like program. It's something that this committee is interested in learning more about, not for immediate implementation, but to be, again, it could be another one of the tools in the kit next session. But I just wanted to check while you were here, if that's something that you can comment on, or we would need to check back in with you another day when you've had more time to consider.
Well, once again, I'll preamble for Tom, because as the lead author of the Act 62 reports, he'll have the more detailed answers, if any, because we did allude to this concept in the first report.
Right.
Tom can go into that more. And as you said, Senator Bray, we only just got your questions within the hour. So we thought fast, had a quick consult, and we agreed that Tom would do what he could to answer your questions.
Okay, well, thanks. And I apologize for short notice. It's like we're in the kitchen cooking live here. Okay, and we can come back to this. There's nothing definitive we need to decide today, but we're just trying to have a sense of if you had anything you could share with us at this point.
Right. I think I will mostly disappoint you about what I'm able to provide today. This was a topic that came up in the Act 62 proceeding. It's been more than a year since I reviewed the information on this, so
Yeah.
I would hate to misstate anything right now, but at a general level, and I'm sure that the committee is already aware of this, some Vermont utilities have piloted on-bill financing like programs. My understanding generally is that there has been limited uptake or participation in those programs. And I know that some utilities are thinking about how they can use a tool like this moving forward, perhaps in concert with some of the efficiency service providers. I'd be happy to come back to the committee any day this week, once I've had a chance to review the Act 62 record on this.
Okay, well, great. Thank you. If you could take a look as time allows, that would be helpful. I think we just want to set the wheels in motion now to be, again, ready for next year, because we've heard some promising testimony. It's preliminary, but it's something it sounds like it's worth learning more about. One quick question: if a utility were to use such a construct, to the meter, so would they need to? How would that be implemented? Do they need to come to the PUC and go through setting up a new tariff, or how does a utility that was never in the business of financing or passing through financing to customers get into that business? I'm just trying to figure out where the regulatory boundaries are for them. They basically need your permission to do that, even if it's not going to affect electrical rates.
That's something that I'd like to get back to you on after looking into this a little bit more.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. All right. If there are no more committee questions for Ms. Cheney and Mr. Nauer, thanks so much for jumping in. Thanks for your contribution. And we'll go to Mr. Poor. Okay.
Thank you very much for inviting us in.
Thanks again. Good morning, Mr. Poor. Good to see you again.
Good morning.
So I just wanted to check in with you. The bill has been evolving, and we've kept in touch a little bit during the last week about some of the changes. We're just touching base with the department and see if you have questions for us, or if you have anything you want to share with us about sort of the work as it currently exists, and as we finish tuning it up for a vote later this week.
Yeah, thanks. So I guess I only have a couple minutes of comments. One on the language that the PUC had just put forward. I read it briefly while it was up here, and I just want to be sure the committee is just considering the value of having another process, and then coming back next year to kind of hopefully not retread the same ground. But I'm wary of proceedings that are required by the legislature that have very good intentions to move the ball forward, but then we get back into January again and we start from ground zero, and it's just cautious about use of resources. So
right.
I'll just throw that out there for consideration.
Yes, well, thank you. I appreciate that, and because the legislature asks the administration to do work regularly, and I always try to make sure that we're not asking for something that is not that we're going to use and that actually that whatever work, for instance, in a report, to me, it's always as used as a guideline. Don't ask for a report that the department itself will not use, because how could we have an information need that is useless to them? It doesn't make any sense, like why would we ask for that? In this case, I think we're trying to be very narrow and specific in scope, in terms of the nuts and bolts at the regulatory level for an energy efficiency utility-like approach to handling a particular new charge. So it would be work that we would have to do, I think, anyway to pass a bill. So we want to be ready, especially because it's year 2 of a biennium, to come out of the starting gates promptly. And the other thing too, just to in response is, and I would say this, Mr. Nauer is still on the call. I reread this past week the Act 62 preliminary and final reports. There is a wealth of information in there, and I would encourage anyone on the committee to revisit, because there is, I want to make sure we're taking advantage of all the work already done. And they have, I think, delivered a pretty clear answer to the legislature about the task at hand. It is that we need to raise substantial funds in a robust and sustainable way for a body of work that's well documented to deliver benefits to Vermonters. No ifs, ands, or buts. So I'm hopeful that when we come back next year, we will have that solid program to offer our colleagues. So thank you, Mr. Ford.
And so the other thing that I was going to speak generally about is essentially just a reminder of the proposed breakdown of the $25 million that was proposed in the governor's budget, and where it stands now, as I understand it, and it's relatively fluid. So $4 million to OEO, the Office of Economic Opportunity, for low-income weatherization. The proposal also had $5 million to the State Energy Management Program. And I think you've taken a lot of testimony on that. It's really important to help municipalities take the next steps, not only to finance investments through the revolving loan fund, but to access the resources that buildings and general services can provide to help them walk through the project. A lot of the municipalities don't have that champion there to that really can know the process and help get it passed through the town's, the own municipalities' local government process.
Yeah. Can I check in briefly on that one? So I think the fund currently has about, revolving loan fund has around $1 million in it. And so how does, can you say something about how much of the money, so the proposal is to go to 5 or add 5, so I guess you'd be at 6, but how much of the money goes to helping deliver those services, technical assistance, outreach, program administration, and how much goes as pass through to help fund projects? Do you know how that works?
So I believe this appropriation is either mostly or all for the projects. Okay. The State Energy Management Program received a grant from VLIGHT and a grant from the Clean Energy Development Fund for the administrative aspects of it. And so okay. The dollars would be directly for the municipal governments to kind of put up the capital for projects.
Okay, thank you.
My understanding is that there's a queue and a pipeline ready to go through Dan Edson and BGS's discussions with municipalities.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, this
Senator McDonald.
This is new news to me, and I'm sure it's my own personal shortcomings, but we're taking weatherization money with the goals of weatherizing to send to different municipalities for different projects, or
No, this is, yeah, so a lot of the discussion in this committee has been about the $16 million that is appropriated for weatherization.
okay.
But there was a broader package that was 25 million, and 5 million of it has always been allocated in the governor's proposal to the state energy management program.
My error, Mr. Chair, usually this committee we serve on and wrestles with the notion that we have a plan to carry out our goals and to achieve something. And we turn around and look to get money to support the thing. And we have to persuade our colleagues to generate, provide us with this money. And they ask us a lot of questions about, how does this thing set up and who does what? And how will the homeowner be, I'm just talking about the weatherization. How will the homeowner be approached? How do you know folks are gonna accept this? How do you get people on board? And we have that all planned and we have it written out, and we go out and meet with towns and we talk about that. Today, we've got a chunk of money and it's that the governor has provided to us. And we are being asked to design the plan on how to use it wisely. And that is a sort of a reversal of how this stuff usually goes. And we haven't worked that plan out yet. We don't have the marketing. We don't know how the various players are going to work together. And we got this chunk of money. And it is stymieing us on how we go to our colleagues, our other senators, and say, here's what we propose and why it's a good idea. So
well, Senator
this is
McDonald,
absolutely what we are not used to. It's a struggle.
okay. So if I can, well, let me try to respond to that, and Mr. Poor may have something to add too. The 16 and 4, because there's also 4 for the low income weatherization program. Those are programs that we already have established with EVT and all the rest. And VHFA is a new player in that field to help move money out. So part of the reason that we're not just concentrating, we're not only saying, great to have more money, now let's just go spend it, is we know to spend it successfully and well is going to require work. We need more people to deliver the service, and that includes the workforce conversations we've been having, and it includes the kitchen table counseling pieces we've been having. So we're both trying to build the capacity of the system in the next 2 years to deliver that. And then the balance of the funds goes into actually the measures themselves, either buying down the cost of financing or supporting rebates and the like on the equipment and materials used in the efficiency measures. So,
yes, Mr. Chair, we're suggesting that we're building a system. I suggest I think designing the system before we build the darn thing. And if I may say, the other area in which we've got a lot of money to spend has been the COVID area. And we have designed a system overnight, which has many flaws in it. Some of them small, some of them, noticeable, and some of them perhaps we haven't learned about yet. But that system was designed to get money into people's hands and have them spend it. And even with all the flaws that minor and that we haven't dealt with, the money is getting out there and it's being spent. In this case, the money has to be, the goal is not getting the money to spend, the goal is getting things weatherized. And that is a bigger challenge than spending a lot of money quickly in order to keep the economy afloat. This is a much more targeted thing, and we haven't gotten our targets clear. So,
Okay.
And they're separate problems. So
yeah, and they're separate streams of money, which I agree. We've never had so many different streams of money to contend with. I mean, contend is the wrong verb. To use, to deploy. So we had COVID money from last year. We have another tranche of 1.3 billion that's heading our way. There could be federal programs related to energy. And now we also are enjoying a passing temporary surplus in state revenues from our revenue, our revenue stream. So all this money that we're discussing right now that Mr. Poor was just alluding to this is our transient state revenue surplus, not federally derived. So it's really feeding into programs that we've been running on our own already. We're just trying to make them more robust, is my description of it.
And the programs are not prepared and not capable of spending that kind of money today. This is when we have to plan how to spend it effectively.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, and the good news there is, for instance, OEO said that they could manage an influx of 20% over their prior year budget. And that would be sort of the stretch limit for them without, straining their ability to spend the money well. And that's partly because they had a setback in terms of delivering services for COVID. Then they figured out ways how to pick up the pace and recover for the year. And that sort of pick up the pace and recover strategy, they feel like they can continue to deploy it, as I understand it. And that lets them do an extra 180 homes in the coming year over the previously planned 900. So it's that kind of thing. But I think if you want to go bigger than that, that's what we're really talking about figuring out in this bill.
Never ran across anybody in government, including myself, that couldn't be given more money and find a way to spend it. So, which we are trying to get houses weatherized with the money we have and lay the groundwork to, beyond that, to begin to change the energy sources to heat those houses. And that's a different challenge. Okay. Thank you.
And the trick is to spend it efficiently and responsibly, which is to your point. I think that's the point you're making, is that we want to be sure that we want to be use our public resources wisely, and we do we do have designed programs here. The State Energy Management Program is designed. There's been a lot of thought that went into it, for instance, and we've identified, the Act 62 report identified a number of gaps, and funding is one of them. And as the chair has said a number of times, that this is an opportunity to bridge temporarily, at least, one of those gaps. So I think we're trying to do that responsibly.
The chair reminds us that if we continue on our current responsible system, it'll take us 2 years to do what we hope to do, and that's the difference between that system and the one that hasn't been developed yet, is what we're trying to achieve here today. So I will thank you, Mr. Chair, and
So I'll just mention the 16 million, which you've all taken a lot of testimony on, and I'll just, as a reminder, since it's back from town meeting week, it's a combination of three main pieces. It's an appropriation to Vermont Housing Finance Authority to allow them to use their financing wizardry to be the capital development backbone that supports financing and to provide weatherization services to low and moderate income Vermonters. It's an appropriation to Efficiency Vermont to continue their incentives at the 2020 levels, the higher levels that were originally supported by Act 62, transfer of funds from the electric sector, and saw high uptake of those programs and more weatherizations happening. And third is workforce development, which would include funding for expanded reach for NeighborWorks type counseling services to bring more contractors into the network and to help customers navigate the weatherization process. And really, I'll add this comment, is that the workforce development should really include an emphasis or a priority on expanding the workforce rather than just simply upscaling the workforce. We need more people in the workforce. We need them to be highly trained also, but it's going to have that initial priority. And so you've heard a week and a half ago about a 9-5-2 split on those types of activities: 9 million to VHFA, 5 million to Efficiency Vermont, and 2 million for workforce development. I think VHFA and Efficiency Vermont will be in tomorrow to talk a little bit more about that. Their conversations have continued over the last week and a half, and it's very fluid. So those they'll be able to speak more precisely, I think, tomorrow on the exact amounts.
Great. Right. And thanks for previewing that. So the question to all the folks who are coming in tomorrow has been the same set of questions. How much money are you asking for to be expended on what, to meet what program goals, and how long is this money going to last? Are you going to be able to get all the way over the 2-year bridge, for instance? So we'll hear those, start nailing down those details
Right.
with the providers or the deliverers of all this work.
Right. Yeah, I think that they'll be best able to speak to that. I will comment on one thing, is that we've, in the appropriations language that the admin has developed so far, the draft language, we have had the Efficiency Vermont funds come through the Department of Public Service as kind of a pass-through to VEIC as the implementer appointed to be Efficiency Vermont right now. And so that mechanism is really simply intended to be a pass-through, but it is also intended to facilitate the funds being supplemental to their demand resources plan work, and we can it'll help us roll those funds into setting new performance targets for them and ensuring they are delivering the programs pursuant to their appointment, which has a whole host of mechanisms to ensure that responsible use of funds that I was talking about. And so I wanted to point that out. I don't know that anybody's mentioned that before, so I thought it'd be useful.
Right. Well, thank you. We were talking about, as a somewhat analogous pool of money, something like an energy savings trust fund that would go to the department, that would be dispersed by the department in the same way. So it's like, just laying another set of tracks parallel to what we've already laid on the electrical energy efficiency side, even though the delivery system could look very different, because it's not a single, and it's not a single large entity like Efficiency Vermont delivering that service. So I don't know how, there's things to be figured out. If you are to carry that model forward, how does a group of providers deliver something analogous to a demand resource plan? I don't know the answer to that. But it's good to have somewhere that we're a star to steer by on this. Okay. Anything else you'd like to share with us while you're here?
I think that's it for now, unless the committee has any other questions.
Okay. No, I think I'm looking around. I don't see any other questions. Thanks very much for coming back in. And I did see some language on the House side. Thank you for pointing it out to me, related to the altered authority for VHFA in order to be able to function as proposed under this plan. And so I passed that along to Ms. Chakowski and asked her to incorporate that into our next draft, so that we'll have that language stood up and ready to go through by the committee. So thank you for that.
Right, thanks. And VHFA is obviously the right person, right entity to ask any questions
Yes.
of on that.
Yes, I I sent that off to Ms. Collins and said, by the way, since we're talking about your shop, you might want to look this over and let us know what you think. So thank you. Thank you for giving us something to work with. Okay, great. If there are no more questions for Mr. Poor, no more comments, thank you. Good to see you again. And we'll move forward and ask Ms. Chakowski to join us so that we can look at the next draft of the bill. So we have the bill as introduced, but it is literally what we voted out, of committee prior to a town meeting week break. So if there's no objections, I think it makes sense to go to our own next draft, which would be in effect the strike all amendment. And I'm figuring we'll have a series of these this week. The goal is to pass the bill out on Thursday. I still think that's possible, and but we do have Friday as kind of an emergency day if there's a last round of edits or something like that. It'll give us time to get a clean final draft in and have the vote Friday if we need it. I'm still hoping we aim for Thursday. And with that, I'd like to turn to Ms. Chakowski to look at the next draft. Thanks so much.
Good morning, Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. And so as the chair just mentioned, when we last spoke about this bill, it was in its draft form. So it was 21-0342. It was introduced this morning in the Senate and received an S number. So it is now S109, and posted today on the website under my name is the as introduced version. But I also have this strike all amendment to present. So strike all amendment to S109. The first section is the same. This is amending the building efficiency goals in section 581 of Title 10 to state that to improve substantially the energy fitness of at least 120,000 housing units and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 0.32 million metric tons carbon dioxide CO2 equivalent by 2031.
Thank you. And just in passing for the committee, I'm going to check in with the department and make sure that the 032 target is on track with Paris and the end of the decade goals.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator McCormick.
McCormick, would you and Ellen prefer that we hold our questions till after she presents, or as we go along?
Let's pop them up as we go, and if it's going to take, if they need more, let's just at least get them on the table. And if we can't answer them briefly, then we'll schedule more time to come back to them. But it's good to catch them while we're doing the work together.
Okay, well, I don't want, I think my question would probably interrupt the flow of the presentation, so I'll hold it till afterwards.
Okay.
Okay, section 2 is new language. So this is amending the Office of Economic Opportunity, the Office OEO, their authority. So in Title 3, Section 3902, the new language is at the top of page 3, but so the director of the Office of Economic Opportunity may provide financial assistance to community service agencies for the planning, conduct, administration, and evaluation of community service programs, to provide a range of services and activities having a measurable and potentially major impact on causes of poverty in the community or in areas of the community where poverty is particularly acute problem. So this is all existing language. Components of those services and activities may involve without limitation of other activities and supporting facilities designed to assist low-income participants. So at the top of page 3, there's new language: to provide and maintain adequate housing and a suitable living environment, while also working to achieve the state's energy savings and carbon emission reduction goals, including those in 10 VSA 581. So this is tying in the language we just discussed in section 1 to the directive to the Office of Economic Opportunity.
Senator Westman, this was your good suggestion. Does this work for you?
Well, it ties OEO to the state's stated goals, which in a way that I think is important. I think we heard from them that they were going to work on their mission statement, but I think the place that, because they are a creation of the state, that in the language that gives them their authority, it is important that we restate the energy savings goal, so they are mindful of what the goal of the state is. Yeah, I like it.
Thank you. Any other comments before we go on? All right.
Okay. Section 3, I reserved for the section on the Public Utility Commission proceeding. And so this is where the language the Public Utility Commission provided would go. And then section 4 is contains new language. It's 2 different reports back to this committee. So broadly, the first one is about workforce, and then there is a second one more about outreach and counseling. So the
Keeps
first one.
jumping around. It's hard to read.
Oh, I'm sorry. What?
And can I, sorry to interrupt, Ms. Tchaikovsky. Let me do a little preamble, because this came out of the conversations over the last 10 days. There was the concern expressed by some folks, senators, that creating the working group we had in the earlier draft created, a 12-member panel meeting over a period of 6 months, and that it's a relatively good-sized panel, and it seemed to some folks duplicative of the work of the Climate Council, which I can understand why it might appear that way. So we're eliminating that 12-member working group. I've talked with the pro tem. The pro tem is allowed to authorize any standing committee to hold a meeting after adjournment with permission. So as needs be, we can convene between now and next January with permission again to work on things. But meanwhile, Senator Westman, I thought, had a good idea, and that why not reach out on 2 of the 3 things that we wanted to work on. 1 was funding, 2 was workforce, 3 was counseling. Reach out to the communities that already deliver the workforce work, and reach out to the community that already does the counseling and ask them to work together to come back to us in fall with a report on how we could deliver a coordinated system of counseling and a coordinated system of workforce education and development. So that's the way I would describe it. Senator Westman, this was your idea, so you may want to say more. And then what Ms. Schakowsky is about to walk us through was my attempt at trying to finesse how do we get those reports when we're not actually leading a standing, a work group through the summer and fall. We're only meeting on a kind of an ad hoc basis. So Senator Westman, can you say something more about the thinking? Even if this isn't what you quite intended, can you explain the idea to the committee?
Well, I think you laid it out fairly succinctly. I think that we have Efficiency Vermont, we have the community action agencies, and now we have money in the appropriation for VHFA, all to do workforce development. We also have language for VHFA, I think $2.5 million. And we have the community action agencies that are already dedicating money to counseling. And we have Efficiency Vermont doing outreach. Why don't we just, the thought was, why don't we just ask them if they were going to work together to create for workforce development a certificate program with, I don't know whether VTC or the tech centers, but have them come back with a plan that they believe works to us and feed it back to us. I wouldn't have it just the Senate Natural Resources Committee. I would also direct them to send it to our counterparts in the House.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea is let the people doing the work come back with us with a plan, and then we get to critique it and play in with that. But they're doing the work right now. The appropriations that they're getting and the monies that they're spending in existing pots all seem separate to me. And I think if we can get everyone working together to train people to work, I'm not going to train, I'm talking too much, but I'm not going to train somebody to work, to do this work in the workforce development field. And they're going to be doing the same kind of work, whether you're working through the VHFA or Efficiency Vermont or the community action agencies. So there's functions that they need to come together and report back to us and tell us what we need to do to help them move this all in one direction.
Great. I agree. I mean, one of the other things this really fits into is the conversation we heard about how crucial it is if you want to attract high school students and others, for instance, to have it be a career pathway, not just quote unquote learning how to weatherize a home.
Right. I can see a certificate for workforce that if you have that certificate, you're going to be doing work through all of these different groups that we're trying to work with. So, have them work together and tell us how they can better coordinate what they're already spending and what we're appropriating. And into the future, create a path where if there is new money, it all is working together.
Desperately needed.
Senator Senator McDonald. Yep.
It's on track.
Okay. All right. So here's the construct to try to get there. And Ms. Schakowsky, if you could walk us through this.
Sure. So I'm at the top of page 4 in the strike all amendment. Section 4, development of weatherization workforce and counseling services reports. On or before June 15th, 2020, the Senate Committee on Natural Resources and Energy shall meet with the Department of Labor, the Agency of Education, and other parties currently delivering programming to train workers to perform services related to thermal energy savings and weatherization. Thereafter, the Department of Labor shall lead a weatherization workforce group that shall develop plans for a coordinated delivery of a standardized statewide building sciences curriculum that includes weatherization. The curriculum shall be designed to establish a career pathway in energy efficiency construction and shall include a certification that is broadly recognized, transparent, and portable. On or before October 1st, 2021, the Department of Labor shall report to the Senate Committee on Natural Resources and Energy a plan for enhancing the coordinated delivery of the standardized building sciences training program in order to support the goals of 10 VSA 581.
So it's possible we would have that first meeting before we ever adjourn for the summer. I don't know how the rest of the session's going to go, but I was trying to make it about as easy as possible for us to have a first meeting, kick this off, and then ask an agency to lead it, because someone needs to lead it that we can actually deliver a charge like this to, since it won't be us through a regular work group.
Well, I think I'd say first off, for me, the people doing the work are Efficiency Vermont.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be VHFA is going to have a role to help raise the money into that, and the community action agencies. We ought to charge them to come back with, and they're already spending money, the community action agencies and Efficiency Vermont. Let them come back with a coordinated first draft and have them present that to us.
Okay.
That's what I would you know, I think this is a nice stab at this. And when they come back with their report, they ought to report back to us and the standing committee in the House.
Right.
So they don't feel left, because if it looks like we're taking this over, the House is not going to like it.
Yeah. No, that's my oversight. You know, just working with my batteries running down a little bit, maybe.
No,
I agree.
You know, this takes a stab at directly the area that, and I think those groups ought to work in consultation with the Department of Labor and all of those to pull something together, and then they ought to feed back to us. And I would give them till the fall to do that, and then we meet after that to understand what they're saying to us.
Okay. So in this case, they report back October 1st. With the goal of giving us basically October, November to work, since December is not a very good work month for drafting.
I think October 1st would be a good time to do that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's continue to work on that, and maybe I'm guessing that we're going to need to sort of go around a few times on this one to get it right. I'd like to propose, because we are on a tight schedule, keep going. I'll reach out. Who is interested in being part of an additional conversation to edit this, so that by the time we get back together tomorrow, we'll have the next iteration that's more than just bringing the House into the draft.
When are you thinking about doing that? Are you thinking about meeting as a group? I just know that.
Right. I mean, today is already a pretty packed day, so.
Yeah. I'm just asking to see if I'm interested. It's just a question of, I know our committees are going till 5 today, and then chairs meetings, etc.
Yeah, I don't, you know, I would say, I was going to say at the end of the day, but the end of the day is looking quite late today, like 6 o'clock by the time chairs is over. And
Mr. Chairman,
yes,
yeah,
sir.
it's not that I'm uninterested, it's that I'm pretty well booked.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
think
would
that-
like to have that conversation though.
okay,
Yeah,
Be
Well,
glad to speak with Senator Westman this evening when we're both free and to try and follow up on what you're asking for.
okay.
Yeah,
So
when is Ellen free to talk with us?
well, that's what I was going to
Is
say.
she's probably booked till late too. I want to be respectful of that.
yes,
Yes,
because I will be with many of you in finance later. Yeah, I mean, I will be available after 6 also. I think based on what you just mentioned, though, I think this language is pretty close because it almost sounds like we just need to reverse the positions here of picking one of the smaller groups to then work with the state agencies. So, you know, my primary question is, do you want to pick one of these groups to lead? Like, would you prefer to have Efficiency Vermont take the lead to form the stakeholder group to report back? Or one of the community action agencies? So otherwise, I think it's fairly close.
right. Okay, so you know, in order to be sensitive to both parties, maybe we would ask them to like co-chair it. You know, that the CAAs plus one person from the CAA, one person from Efficiency Vermont sit down and organize that group. The other thing too, that I got an email just shortly before committee, Richard Fazie's been in here with builders and remodelers and other folks who are all interested in building science, whatever we want to call it. And I know that he's been, because this issue has been in our bill now for 2 weeks, there's a group that's naturally formed on their own. And they said, oh, well, we have some ideas. We want to kick them in to the committee. So happily, we have interested parties, and I'm trying to find out who's a spokesperson for them, and get them in tomorrow. So, okay. So how does that sound to the committee? Ms. Chakowski will rewrite based on this conversation. I'll email people and see if they want to have a further discussion tonight. Probably like 7, I think, is about the earliest everyone will have cleared the decks.
I'm game to do anything this evening. I want her to be able to put together another draft and be able to have at least a little while to read it, and then make comments.
Okay. And are you saying for this evening?
If she can get it together for this evening,
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Ms. Chakowski, what's feasible for you without causing problems in your life and well-being?
It's crossover week. I am available to work on this evening. So
Okay.
that's fine. And if you'd like me to be available to attend the meeting or wait for your edits after, either is fine.
All right. So it sounds like maybe we should build in an extra half hour for people and just say, if you would send us the Zoom link for 7:30, and if you could make some edits based on the conversation you just heard, then we'll be one step further along, and we'll look at that new language this evening.
Okay.
Senator Sue can attend. Great. No one's expected to be there. And it just means when we come into committee tomorrow, we'll have a more mature draft to review. Great. Excellent. Thank you, everybody. So, and Ellen, you'll send out the Zoom?
Yes.
Okay, great.
So,
All right.
Subsection B here has a very similar structure to what we just talked about, slightly different focus. So on or before June 30th, this committee shall meet with the Office of Economic Opportunity, the directors of the community action agencies, Efficiency Vermont, and other parties currently providing outreach and counseling services to low income and moderate income Vermonters for the state's energy savings programs, including thermal and transportation energy efficiency programs. Thereafter, the Office of Economic Opportunity shall lead an energy savings counseling group that shall develop plans for the coordinated and effective delivery of counseling services designed to enroll and deliver energy savings programs to their target service populations. On or before October 15th, OEO shall report to the Senate Committee a plan for coordinating and enhancing their counseling services to low and moderate income Vermonters who could benefit from the state's energy savings programs, including thermal and transportation energy efficiency programs.
So Senator Westman, how did we do? This was
Can you
an attempt to
back
do
up?
this again.
Can you back up to the first part?
Sure.
I think it really is the same issue as the one before.
Right.
We want the people doing the work to all come together and report back to us. And the community action agencies, Efficiency Vermont, and we've got that the money, the $1 million to VHFI, all for outreach. That all should be coordinated together. So it's the same issue, and and they should come back with a plan for workforce, a plan for counseling,
Okay.
And right now they all have they're training people to talk to people. It ought to be done in a seamless way.
Right. And what I don't know enough about what they do, to what degree, because they may work with different so-called target populations, does the training vary depending on who you're working with? To what degree is there sort of shared best practices, and to what degree do they need to customize what they do because they're offering, I don't know, a different suite of services to a different population of citizens?
Right.
Okay.
This moves in the right direction. It's the same sort of principle as the issue just before.
Okay. So we'll pick that
And
one
we
up.
need to add in reporting to the House Committee.
Yes. I marked that on mine already. Thank you. Okay. If there are no more questions on that one, then we'll go on to Energy Saving Trust Fund.
So I'm in the middle of page 5, section 5. This section would create an energy savings trust fund. This is some very rough language that needs more details. I'm not quite sure yet where to put it in statute. So this would establish an energy savings trust fund, which shall be managed as a special fund pursuant to Title 32, Chapter 7, Subchapter 5. This fund shall be available for use by the General Assembly for energy savings programs, including weatherization, transportation, and low-income renewable energy projects. Monies from the fund shall be used solely for energy saving programs, including weatherization and transportation programs, and for necessary costs incurred by administering the fund. The fund shall be made up of any funds appropriated to or deposited into the fund. in the next section, there is an appropriation. There are 2 appropriations into the fund, but this needs more details.
Yes, so this also grew out of conversations in the last 5 days with Senator Westman. I think I was just calling it the piggy bank. We have funds coming in. Is there a place to put them and then appropriate them to appropriate projects? So for instance, the low income, there'll be a bill introduced tomorrow, which I'm going to invite you all to sign on to if you're interested. It's not a sales pitch. It's the community scale renewable energy bill. We've had it for several years. We'll just reintroduce it. It is a sort of a perfect vehicle to do the low income weatherization piece in, if it had just one new section. So at any rate, so where would you put the money for that project? Or the other thought was there is money arriving in Vermont at a scale that I've never seen in my lifetime before, and in different tranches. We've already talked about 3 of them. And we also have a senior delegation in DC that could be helpful perhaps in helping us secure funding for a project. So the thought was, if we, as part of being able to make a pitch to the federal delegation, for instance, it seems prudent to say, not only do we have a program that we're trying to grow, but we have a mechanism to receive monies and then appropriate them into the program. I'm trying to make us closer to shovel ready from the term from the era image, era, where shovel ready was the mantra for how to be a successful applicant. So that's all this is. I did get a note that it says for use by the General Assembly. And we just heard TJ Poor talking about how actually we've had funds that were at the Department of Public Service and were allocated out of there. So my suggestion would be to make this as much like other funds as possible and to replace General Assembly with Department of Public Service. So that's the concept. That's why it's here. Was not in our last draft. It's sort of a piggy bank and trying to be prudent and create some opportunities for ourselves that could happen in the next year. Because that was the other realization I had over town meeting week break. We'll get to pass a bill now. We won't get to pass another bill for another year. So meanwhile, there's a lot of money moving around. What can we do to make ourselves prepared to participate in spending some of that money well, if we could pull it in?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator McCormick.
Thank you. This is real nitpicking on my part, but just, and I read this whole section as sort of a placeholder. I think just that the concept is in the draft and that it will be redrafted, this section, but there's a typo at the very beginning where it says this is established. I think it should read there is established.
Okay.
And B doesn't actually say anything. The fund shall be made up of any funds appropriated to or deposited into the fund. I mean, I think that's self-evident. I think we should. I think what it is that we don't know where the money's going to come from. Is that the problem there?
Right.
Well,
So
in the very next section, we actually send some money to it, but.
Well, so typically when you establish a fund, you establish how that fund is maintained, what monies maintain that fund, and there were no other specific monies mentioned, so I cut what normally, might otherwise be there.
So can I
know, and Ellen, I'm not criticizing your work. You had to do language for a fund that we don't know how we're going to fund it. So I mean, right. I think you did the best that could be done under the circumstances.
Yeah.
Do we need, what would happen if we just deleted B altogether?
I mean, not much.
Right.
I also, we could have combined the second and third sentence. Yes, this. you know.
Okay,
All right, so.
you handled that
noted.
very well, Ellen. Acknowledged.
So, I'm just trying to think here. So would we, for example, because it's going to be over, there, it's going to be hard for them to spend all the money in 1 year. The 10 million that goes in that is appropriated for community solar, would we put the money in here, authorize the up to 10 million be taken out of this fund for that, and have it multiple years?
You are a mind reader. In the next section of appropriations, there's the 10 million. Well, actually, 9 of the 10 all gets put in there, but that's in order to free up money for something else. But yeah, that was one of the things I thought. That is, we know from what department has said that they're not planning on implementing for most of a year. So, okay,
Well,
that's like the seed fund.
It would seem to me that what they're going to do is, and it would be somewhat the same for job training, till we have a program for, or a certificate or whatever it is to train somebody for work. We certainly aren't going to be offering any subsidies for people to take that training. So it may take more than a year to get there, but this puts a fence around the money, particularly the one-time money. And then if we find between now and the time this is appropriated into this fund that the monies, there's other federal monies that come down that could be spent for these functions, you could swap that state money out and that money could stay in this fund.
Right. I mean, there is that opportunity. And I think you and I have talked, other members of the committee have talked, to what degree as we learn more about CARES money, particularly as it impacts the stresses for low-income Vermonters, could CARES money legitimately flow in to fill things that we're currently going to do out of general fund and free up general fund dollars for us? Okay. All right, so let's leave the construct there for now. Senator Polina has arrived to talk to us about S102, but if we could we just briefly walk through the remaining sections? Because I think there's a discussion. So let me just say, I edited a little to try to find some money for some of this transportation work that we talked about. That's why these numbers are slightly different than what 952, for instance. And it's just an idea. But let's go through them and then we'll have the discussion later about how much for what. I know that this is a fluid area of the bill, how to get the most out of the money we have.
So Section 6 has $35 million for weatherization initiatives as follows: $4 million to DEC, Office of Economic Opportunity, for the Home Weatherization Assistance Program, up to $150,000 may be used for vermiculite remediation, home repair as part of home weatherization. $4 million to BGS for low-cost financing to municipalities to seek to leverage energy savings opportunities. $9 million to the Agency of Administration to VHFA for financial support of housing weatherization statewide. $5 million to the Department of Public Service to go to weatherization incentives delivered by Efficiency Vermont. $2 million to DPS to workforce development initiatives to support the expansion of NeighborWorks of Western Vermont's Heat Squad program. $9 million to the Energy Savings Trust Fund to support the creation of low-income renewable energy projects. And then $2 million to the Energy Savings Trust Fund to support pilot projects offering innovative methods of financing energy savings measures, including to the meter programs.
So that was, let me explain that one. So we've talked about to the meter. You'd have to have funds in order to be able to offer that service. And so one way to have the ability to run a pilot is put some money in this trust fund. If it weren't allocated, if there were no takers, then the money would be free to go to the things we've already discussed. But anyway, it's just a for discussion concept.
And then finally, in section 7, on page 7, there is new language in the VHFA's authorizing language, giving them the authority to develop a program to finance and promote housing weatherization using funds appropriated by the state, or through bonding, notes, or other obligations, and from grants or other sources.
Okay. Any committee questions before we pause this and check in on our other duties, which include hearing from the Committee on Agriculture, because we've been referred Bill S-102, which they would like to see make crossover. And then we have Senator Sirotkin coming in because although we didn't have the bill referred to us, there's provisions that relate to municipal planning and zoning that this committee discussed last year in the, I'm forgetting the bill number, maybe Ms. Chakowski knows.
It's S-101. Last year it was S-237.
Thank you. Okay, with that, good morning, Senator Polina.
Good morning.
Good to see you. Last time you were here, I think with us, we made some good mischief on the bottle bill, which is still paying dividends to the state of Vermont in the form of its cheats.
This is true. That was fun. It took about 8 years, but it worked out okay.
Yes, yeah. And I think it was around this time of year or the end of the session, one or the other. So S-102, Mr. O'Grady's here to talk about the bill sort of more technically and in detail, but you know, my question to anyone who brings a bill in the room or proposal is, what problem or opportunity did the committee see, or the sponsor, and how does the bill address that problem or opportunity? Sometimes it's both.
Sure. Well, we can talk about the opportunity, but for the record, I'm Anthony Polina. I represent Washington County. In terms of the opportunities, there's a couple of them. First of all, the bill is designed to keep food scraps out of landfills, which is something we're all trying to do. It's designed to encourage diversification of agriculture and diversifying farm income. It's going to build healthy soils by attributing more composting into local soils as well. And it supports the growing poultry egg production industry in the state of Vermont. So it's got a couple of good things that it's going to be able to target in terms of increasing the viability of agriculture and the environment. Several farms have for years been bringing food residuals onto their farms as part of their composting operations. And they've also been allowing chickens to forage on those compost piles, and they provide eggs that the farmers then sell in local markets. there seems to have been some questions arose the last couple of years as to whether or not bringing food residuals onto farms for composting and poultry raising was an agricultural activity or a solid waste management activity. I don't know if that's the best way to phrase it, but so what this bill does is it clarifies that, in fact, bringing food residuals onto farms and allowing poultry to forage on those compost piles is in fact an agricultural activity, as long as, excuse me, as long as no more than 2,000 cubic yards of food residuals per year are imported, and the compost is principally used on the farm, or the farm is a small farm raising or managing poultry. So basically what the bill does is it clarifies the fact that bringing food residuals onto farms at a certain amount with limited amounts is a farming activity and should be therefore come under the purview of the Agency of Agriculture, and not necessarily make these farmers have to get permits from the Agency of Natural Resources. In a nutshell, what the bill does is it amends the definition of agriculture, of farming, I shouldn't say agriculture, but farming, under Act 250 and actually under the RAPs, to make it clear that this activity is an agricultural activity. It then establishes an agricultural residuals management program at the Department of Agency of Agriculture, which would make the Agriculture Agency come up with some rules regarding proper composting, public health, safety, environmental health, and things like odors, noise, and nuisance around the composting operations. And in the meantime, until those rules are developed, the operations would continue to come under Agency of Natural Resources rules. But that's it in a nutshell. I mean, Michael can get into a lot more detail, but I should say that's half of the bill. Senator Pearson is going to talk about the other half. We worked on this composting residuals bill for a couple of years, as you probably remember. And then the agency came in with a bunch of other language that is related but different. It was almost like taking two separate bills. So we ended up basically saying we would both report the bill. So that's why Senator Pearson is here as well. So I can answer questions about what I just said around the compost foraging, food residual operations, and Christopher could talk a little bit about the rest of the bill, if that's okay.
Sure. Good morning, Senator Pearson. I do have a quick question. This was, there's been contention between ANR, which has had jurisdiction, does overall solid waste handling in the state, and Agency of Agriculture. So sure. Can you talk a little bit about how these two agencies have settled out and what their position is on what you're proposing here?
Well, they both support the proposal. We've done a lot of counseling and mediation between the two agencies over the last couple of years. And we honestly went back and forth. I mean, as we're well aware of the I don't know whether I call it the conflict, but the interplay between the two agencies. But this year, when we came back in to discuss the bill, basically ANR came up first and said that they were supportive of the language that we had. And then we spent our time with the ag agency as well, of course, and they decided that they would support it as well. So right now, basically, there's a kumbaya kind of moment around this, which is kind of unusual for them, but both agencies are supporting the bill as it's written now.
Okay. And sorry, before going to Senator Pearson, Mr. O'Grady, I know you have a tight timeline this morning. When do we lose you? I don't know if we have time for Senator Pearson to go first, or you need to
I'm here until noon.
Okay, great. All right, Senator Pearson, we don't know, the enticing Senator Polina's come up with the teaser. Now we know you have another whole half of the puzzle. We don't know what it is.
Well, and thank you, committee. Nice to see you, Senator Pearson from Chittenden. The second half is a soil amendments registry, and basically the way I think of that is that allows the ag agency to handle different kinds of soil amendments. They of course already regulate pesticides and herbicides, but there's all these different class of garden products or what have you that float under the radar right now and are not regulated. Once we bring them into soil amendments structure, there's a small fee associated with that. And then suddenly the Agency of Ag has enough of an infrastructure between people and a little bit of some resources to deal with soil amendments, which include compost. So it was really, I think, mechanically how the agency saw both a need in terms of these unregulated amendments going onto soils, and our desire to have their input on very small compost operations. And this was a way for them to say, we could actually pull this off if you gave us oversight over soil amendments. So I'm not super studied on my sections of the bill. I'm going to depend on Mr. O'Grady for that. But the basic principle is soil amendments, things that are marketed to farmers and to gardeners and everybody as, enhancing the output, enhancing the health of your soil, etc. Some of them are great. Some of them probably don't do anything. They need to be handled in a serious way, because these are chemicals in some cases that are going into our soil. And we have basically had no view into this whole universe of products. Many other states do handle them like we're contemplating doing here. And again, by looping them into the fee structure that we have elsewhere already in statute, that gives us, the agency, the resources needed to regulate these soil enhancements and handle the compost part of this bill that Senator Polina was describing.
Okay. It sounds a little like something analogous to the FDA, that drugs should be safe and efficacious or something. Is this a way of the state having a look to make sure that a quote unquote soil amendment is safe and effective or something like that?
It is. It's also sort of, if you say the soil amendment is 10% nitrogen or whatever, that it will actually be 10% nitrogen. There is sort of this truth in advertising, Mr. Chair, is what you're talking about. And right now, we're powerless, completely powerless about to hold manufacturers accountable, to hold sellers accountable, and that would change under this. Just in the same way that we do handle other regulated soil, pesticides, herbicides, and probably some other examples that maybe Michael can help us with. But yes, truth in advertising, actually having the product be what it claims to be is what we're talking about here.
Yep. Great. Let me ask one of the questions that I think, there's been the Natural Resources Committee and the Ag Committee have different sort of views about how to proceed on some things. That's totally to be expected. One of the areas of contention, I think, in for decades actually, has been water quality. And one of the concerns has been that having the agency that promotes agriculture also regulate water quality is not well suited to doing the job. It's sort of an inherent conflict of interest. So, and that's obviously debatable, but I think there is that concern, and we see almost every year a bill that says we would like to move all water quality issues back to ANR, have no such thing as agency of ag regulation of it. So I'm just want to ask this question on behalf of, the folks who might be concerned that now a portion of solid waste that was under the regulation of ANR will move over to ag, and that with their role of promoting agriculture, they may not be as well suited to serve as regulators of the activities there. So I'm trying to be fair and neutral about that question, because it's a real question to have the promoter be the regulator.
Yeah, I mean, my answer is I don't totally disagree with you. I actually think we should have an agency of enforcement, and have more multi sort of jurisdictional trainings for our folks, so that you don't have one state worker on a farm that says, "Oh, I can't look at that. That's ANR's. I'm only looking at the whatever non-point source pollution." To your to your specific point about and how it relates to this bill, the Agency of Ag is already regulating water quality on farms today, and has been doing that only in the last several years. We've beefed up staff over there, and what I understand to be the fact is that the water runoff challenges from farms has been improving. So, you know, the question that, to me, we've already got the personnel, they're already going to the farms, they're already doing this inspection. Now what we're talking about is should we have some ability for farms to add another diversification strategy to their business? Should we have farms help the state with our problem, which is very real today, of handling our food scraps? We do not have capacity for that as we've ramped up, you know, as the good work that you and others, all of us have done on our food scraps and solid waste laws. We're exporting a bunch of our food scraps to Maine on trucks to be incinerated. That's ridiculous. We also have the need to build soil structure, build soil health, and as I said, to help farmers diversify their operations. So to me, those are win-win-wins. The fact that in order to make that easy, you got to accept a shift of the jurisdiction to the Agency of Ag is already the people that are regulating the ag practices. And so it doesn't seem to me to be a huge stretch. And we worked really hard to get A&R and ag to come together and say, yes, this is the right thing to do. We agree.
I would also, I mean, I also agree that the enforcement question is an important question, and it's one that we're going to continue to talk about in the years to come. I think it's a really valid discussion to have as to where the enforcement should take place. But just to piggyback a little bit on what Christopher just talked about, I think the real issue that we've been dealing with in this particular bill is whether or not these composting operations, and that are particularly foraging with chickens, poultry on them, whether it's a farming activity or not. And it clearly is, in our view, a farming activity. Where the enforcement comes down in the years to come is something that we're open to discussing. But the real key question in this particular bill is this an agricultural activity or not? And there's broad agreement that it is, in fact, an agricultural activity.
And it's one of those old-fashioned agricultural activities, by the way, that, you know, 40 years ago, nobody would have thought twice about. And we kind of have moved through this arc of regulation where we prohibited an ancient practice, and now we've sort of slid back into allowing compost foraging and not had a neat place to put that in our regulatory structure. So we're trying to make it clear that.
And there are a number of farmers who have said that they would like to go in this direction in terms of building the local egg market as well, and that they feel comfortable doing it under the rules that we're laying out in this particular bill, whereas some of them were afraid that they would not move forward if in fact we didn't recognize it as an agricultural activity.
Right, because then there are tax consequences, et cetera.
Right.
Senator McDonald.
Were this legislation to pass, would these operations enjoy the exemption from Act 250?
Yeah. They would be considered agricultural activities, yes. And the definition of farming would be amended in Act 250, which is where the definition of farming really lives. So there would be a change to the definition of farming under Act 250, and these things would in fact be considered agricultural.
I think
they also enjoy the same zoning exemptions that agriculture
yes.
activities enjoy?
Sure. Right, because this is already taking place on farms. These are not going to be standalone compost operations. This is on farms.
Well, the city where you live, excuse me?
Well, I'd like to answer a piece to this that's, I think, an important detail. A&R today permits this kind of compost operation at a very small scale with a self-certification. So if you own a farm and you've been wanting to accept some food scraps at the same volume that we're talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, you fill out a piece of paper, you self-assert, and you send it in and you're good to go. What we're actually talking about is making that straightforward through the ag agency, but to the chair's earlier question, would come under their water quality, clearly brings it under water quality, whereas A&R is sort of allowing at this scale you to self-attest. So I don't think it's, you're right about zoning and Act 250, but I reject the idea that we're going from a strict environment to the Wild West. We're going from a permissive permit environment to a different permissive environment.
Senator Polina, you've up on the top of the hill in your town of Montpelier's the chicken farm at Machu Picchu, operated by Carl Hammer. How would that be dealt with if it was being proposed tomorrow in a different, what regulations would be different?
Well, I'm really not sure, except that he's a very large, very, very large operation. So I don't think he would fall into this particular definition of what we're talking about, because we're talking about limited size operations. He's gigantic compared to what we're talking about.
That's right.
So how many dozen eggs, or how much compost, or how many acres is that particular operation?
He's
So
way outside of the scale.
Understand what is gigantic and what is not gigantic. Large and small are usually defined with numbers.
He's way outside of the scale of this bill.
In this particular case, we're talking about 2,000 cubic yards per year of food residuals. I don't know how large Carl's operation is. I mean, I've seen it obviously, and I know Carl, but I'm not going to attest the size of his operation. You folks should bring him in and talk to him about it.
So he would not be permitted under this?
He would be, I assume he would have to be permitted under A&R's rules.
You assume?
Yeah, he would, because unless he's under 2,000 cubic yards, yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, you helped me understand some of the questions that are yet to be answered. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah, let's see. So a good sized dump truck's 15 yards, something like that. That'd be 133 dump trucks full of compost is a material would be 2,000 cubic yards. So it's 133 dump trucks full. I'm just trying to, that's the math. If it's a 15-yard dump truck,
right,
which I think is in the range, not the biggest and not the smallest. I think they run something like 12 to 20 these days.
So, yeah.
Okay, well, so one thing I've thought about a little bit, because of our experience with water, which I would frankly say is troubled and still troubling. There was just a report out this morning by chance, talking about the phosphorus reductions, but although they're heading in the right direction, it's a very modest portion of the total phosphorus load reduction. And phosphorus is just a proxy really for many other things that leave farms that are of concern to all of us, because of the scale of the use of different poisons, whatever, insecticides, herbicides, rodenticides, etc. So I'm in the once burned, twice cautious land here, where I'm wondering to what degree there could be water quality impacts related to moving things over. Not, just if we stick to the most fundamental natural resource of all, water and water quality impacts. Senator Pearson, you have something you want to chip in?
Yeah, I believe, and it comes from sitting in your committee and the lessons we learned in those days, that one of the smartest strategies to preventing runoff is building healthy soils. Healthy soils act like a sponge, get us through droughts, handle intense rain events, etc. And the most straightforward way to do that, builds healthy soils, is in fact regenerative practices, I believe, which would include spreading compost on old, depleted lands and building soil from adding organic matters. And so then the question in my mind becomes, well, how do we do that? And how do we make that easy and affordable for farmers to make that choice? At the same time, we have decided to divert food scraps from our landfill for all sorts of reasons. And we're really not able to handle the impact of that decision in terms of actually handling those food scraps here in Vermont. So we have that problem. We have, as you say, the very deep concern about water quality. And in the middle is our farmland and our soil health. And I'm quite convinced that this is as smart a way forward to blend all of those concerns in a way that would be very productive, I think. And certainly, to my mind, not anything but an irresponsible approach. It's actually a sensible, straightforward approach.
Right. Well, I agree with you on soil health. It was a little pushy of us, but it was this committee that added soil health to the RAPs.
Yeah.
But for exactly the reasons you just cited. Senator McCormick.
Thanks. Over the years, I've noticed often the argument for not regulating something or for not having a particular regulator regulate something is that the something you want to exempt is good. The argument many years ago for not for exempting slate quarries from Act 250 was based entirely on how good slate quarries are. The implication being, if you want something to happen, you want to exempt it from regulation. The argument for composting, I think, is a strong argument. And I acknowledge the argument as well that we are not, as a state, competent to deal with compost, apparently. I agree that letting farmers apply compost to depleted soils is a good thing. Why? What is the argument that A&R protecting the water quality of the waters of the state, that is a problem for composting? Why don't we allow and encourage composting and have A&R regulate it, because it has the potential for doing some damage to the state's waters, the people's waters.
Well, so Michael, maybe you could help make sure I remember this, or Senator Polina, I didn't mean to jump in. Do you want to answer that?
Well, I was just going to say that A&R had been regulating these things for a while, and it led to people feeling as if they were concerned about the consequences of A&R's regulation of them in terms of tax liabilities and other kinds of permitting that would be required. And the farmers who were doing it felt as if that they were going to have a harder time operating under those rules. So they feel more comfortable under the ag department, obviously. And I understand the idea about enforcement and promotion and regulation. And those are all good ideas to discuss. But that doesn't mean that, we already have agriculture related to and exempted from certain Act 250 rules and development rules. And this is just a step in that direction, but it's not as if we're opening up the floodgates to like a whole big lack of regulation on these farms.
So the problem with A&R, if I've understood you correctly, Anthony, is that farmers don't like A&R, and we knew that.
No, I don't say they don't like A&R. They're concerned about the consequences. It's not a question of liking them or not liking them.
What consequence? What actual consequence? Other than perceptual consequences, that the farmers don't like those green sneakers telling them what to do. which
Well-
I've heard. I know it. I hear it from my own constituents. That's other than some people's prejudices against a particular agency of our state government. What is the problem with A&R?
Well, Michael's got his hand up, so I'll let Michael
Yeah.
speak.
So
Mr. O'Grady, thank you.
I'd like to reset the context of how this bill came about. For several years, farmers were importing food residuals onto their farms for compost production and for the attendant benefit of allowing poultry to graze on it. That was treated as farming. And the farmer received all the benefits of farming for that area where the food residuals were used for compost production. It was considered farming. But the Agency of Agriculture changed its interpretation of that about 4 years ago now. And it said, well, that importation really isn't farming, it's compost production. And it should be regulated by A&R as solid waste management. Well, that's potentially problematic for many farms because Senator McCormick, you were asking what the consequence was. The consequence was that for that parcel that was used for the compost production, it could no longer be considered farming, which means it's no longer considered subject to use value. It may no longer be subject to Act 250 exemption. It may no longer be subject to land use exemptions. It may no longer be subject to the regulatory scheme that it was operating under for years potentially. So that was the consequence. In addition, there were some requirements under the A&R solid waste rules that some of these small composters were finding difficult, if not impossible, to meet. But they were solid waste rules. They were not water quality rules. The water quality rules remain as they are. The water quality regulatory scheme remains as it is. If there's a violation of the water quality rules, A&R still is the primary enforcement entity. A&R still can bring an enforcement action against that farm for a violation. Now, the Agency of Agriculture does have water quality authority, but what they enforce is the water quality requirements under the RAPs. And the RAPs prohibit you from having a discharge, right? So what the agency implements or water quality, Agency of Ag implements is water quality protection measures, right? And they can enforce those. But when there's a discharge, that goes over to the Agency of Natural Resources because that's their authority. This bill does not change any of that, right? That remains the existing scheme for good or bad, or however you view that scheme, that remains the same scheme. What this changes is how these small farms importing less than 2,000 cubic yards of food residuals per year are going to be treated, whether or not they're going to be treated as farming or whether or not they're going to be treated as a solid waste facility, and who's going to have jurisdiction over them and what the other legal and regulatory consequences are of that determination.
And I think I would just add, one of the real world impacts is that farms are not doing this anywhere to the scale that we want to handle our food scraps and to handle the stated desire of enhancing soil quality, building soil health.
So when we talked about this before, one of the issues that came up was the solid waste rules required turning of the pile and a certain timing and temperature, et cetera, and that the operators who are already, you might call them like artisan composters, said, this isn't the way we do it. And I would imagine that regardless of how you get there, the whole idea is pathogen reduction, right? So are there equal qualities of pathogen reduction in whether you're under the current A&R practices or the proposed, what the bill is proposing now through agriculture?
The current
Mr.
use
O'Grady.
implications I had not thought of. That's disturbing. That is.
Mr. O'Grady, on the pathogen, on the solid waste sort of perspective piece.
So the bill creates that residuals management division at the Agency of Agriculture and tells them to adopt rules regarding the management of food residuals on farms, which will potentially include or should include pathogen reduction management techniques. In the interim between the enactment and when those rules become effective, the Agency of Ag is going to be enforcing the existing composting practices under ANR's rules. So the existing pathogen reduction provisions will be in place till the Agency of Ag adopts those residuals rules underneath the rulemaking granted in this bill. So for the interim, pathogen reduction practices, pathogen standards don't change. Most likely, they're going to be very similar under the Agency of Ag rules with potentially some changes to the management requirements, those issues that you heard the small farmers complain about because they didn't think that they were really applicable to their scope and level of operation.
Yeah. Okay.
So you will have an opportunity through the rulemaking process to weigh in on that level of treatment that may be required.
Okay. The other thing I can imagine as a concern that probably everyone would agree on is what is contained in the residuals that get used. So, are the rules equally, or will they be equally stringent in terms of not having toxins or pharmacological substances or, herbicides, pesticides? That's part of what messed up the intervale. Things like that we wouldn't want to see coming into a farm that's creating compost that then their product might contain those same things that we would want to avoid being included in their compost. How do we address that feedstock question?
So again, in the interim, they're going to be subject to ANR's composting practices and small. I'm looking at the ACPs right now, and medium and large compost facilities have to test, and there's standards for metals and et cetera. I don't think small have to test. Hold on a second, maybe they do. No, they do have to test, and so in the interim, they're going to be subject to testing for metals, fecal coliform, salmonella, and so there's going to be screening requirements that they'll have to undergo, and then those potentially are going to have to be addressed in the Agency of Ag rules.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's very helpful. I'm just trying to think of, regardless of who's doing it, are we protecting against things that none of us want to see happen? Bad things flowing through into the compost, water quality, pathogens, et cetera. Senator Pearson.
Well, you're raising a question. I wonder if I could ask Michael. I mean, at the Intervale, it's about a mile from my house. The big challenge was it was in a floodplain, and so that was a scary realization, and that area now floods very routinely. So, Michael, maybe help us remember how that works today and under this in terms of location questions. As I understand, we're still protective that way. You couldn't do this under either scheme right next to the river, but how do we have protection that way?
So the Intervale was a floodplain issue. It was also a direct discharge issue, and there was also residuals issues with the compost that they were producing. So there are siting requirements under the RAPs. There's also the River Corridor Protection Rule that was enacted to maintain FEMA insurance eligibility in the state. So that is something that farming needs to comply with as well, basically setbacks from the floodplain for certain activities. So they remain in place. So they have to comply with those siting provisions, which were not in effect, neither the RAPs nor the river corridor protection rules when the intervale was cited. There was the federal FEMA rule that said you couldn't have development in a floodplain, but in Vermont, farming is not considered development. And that's why FEMA sent us a letter that said we had to regulate farming in the floodplain. And that's why the river corridor protection rules were adopted. So that siting of this facility that's on a farm needs to meet the RAP siting, needs to meet the river corridor protection siting, and in addition, can't have a direct discharge under the RAPs, and then needs to meet all the other water quality management requirements. And then the residuals management is about the composting standards. In the interim, they're going to be the same, and then there will be new standards underneath the Agency of Ag's rules.
Mr. O'Grady, what in terms of timeline? So if the bill passes, then there's going to be a rulemaking, either a revision of the RAPs or a standalone rulemaking. I one quick question there is, does it make any difference from your perspective which way it's handled? Revise the RAPs versus just do standalone? Is there a significance to that?
Whenever the RAPs are opened up for rulemaking, it opens up other questions for regardless for why the primary interest of amending the RAPs. So at times the agency prefers to just deal with individual issues through individual rules.
Yep. And so if this, I'm sorry.
And because this is really more of a management rule rather than a water quality rule, the option is there for them to treat it either way.
Okay. If this were to pass, when would rulemaking be completed, would you estimate? Or maybe it's specified.
It is not specified. I know you like rules. And
dates
and
yes.
deadlines for them. But there is a provision that says on or before January 15, 2023, they shall consult with and submit testimony to the agency, to the legislature regarding the status of their regulation. It doesn't have a deadline for when they adopt the rules.
Yes. So let me float out to this committee and to Senators Pearson and Polina the idea that we specify. I mean, it's problematic when we try to get things done and then things just drag on. Rulemaking doesn't happen. So Natural has had the habit of specifying start and completion dates for rulemaking. And asking the agencies if they can do it or not. We're not trying to give people unreasonable dates, but we're trying to make something explicit. The other thing, so I don't, let me offer that one up. The other thing is based on our history between ag and A&R, I would also be interested in considering adding a sunset, because it's a sunset that makes people really stop and evaluate whether or not something is working. And it could be, X number of years beyond the end of the rulemaking, so there'd be real world experience with it. But without that, we could, I'm being a little cautious here, we could end up with problems, and it's very hard to undo something once you've handed it off entirely. A sunset would build in a check-in. And so I would ask you just to consider that as a way of, that could be a path to move forward and giving everyone the assurance that we weren't going to create a problem that no one foresaw today as we talked. That's all. So I don't know how that sounds to people. Any thoughts before we adjourn? And I apologize, we've gone over a little bit.
Well, the timeline seems like a fine idea to me. We'd have to talk to committee, obviously. The sunset, I'm just less sure of. I mean, I'm not saying I'm against the idea, but I think I'd want to share that with the committee before I actually took a
Sure.
position on it. But having
Yeah.
a deadline to do the rulemaking seems quite reasonable to me.
Okay.
I would just say that I can handle the deadline, although keep in mind that until those rules are written, they are under the language here held to A&R's rules. So
Sure.
You're not in a Wild West at all.
Yeah.
The sunset, I'm leery of. I share Senator Polina's idea that we would talk with folks, but this is a business operation. And so I think you are kind of asking maybe we're not sharing a problem statement. I don't think we have capacity to handle our food scraps in this state. Do any of you disagree with that? I think we have a real problem. In fact, we should be proud of our aggressive moves to keep food scraps out of the landfill, and we should be embarrassed that we haven't handled them. We do not have facilities. We do not have enough businesses to handle that. So to me, that's the problem statement, that part of what we're trying to address here.
Well, I'd want to hear from DEC to see if that's still true. There's a depackaging machine that's now, I think, up and running at the MRF.
Oh yeah, we heard all about it. Yeah, for sure. We are exporting our food scraps to Maine where they are incinerated. That's a bad idea. So I'd just be leery that you ask people to partner with us to handle our food waste and then say, but 8 years out, we may change our minds. That's uncomfortable for me as I quickly think about it.
Part of this is also the idea that we're hoping and encouraging these folks to build an industry, or can continue to build an industry around local egg production, which is important to them. So as Christopher said, they're building a business, and keep in mind, we're not talking about LFOs in this conversation. We're talking about people who are committed to the land, committed to composting, committed to using food residuals in the best way possible. Most of them are natural farmers or organic farmers, regenerative farmers. We're not talking about LFO folks. We're talking about your neighbors who are like wanting to raise chickens, forage on their compost pile so they can produce eggs for the local markets, which is important to all of us.
Right. Well, I was using the word artisan on purpose. I appreciate what we've learned over the years talking to people who are really good at this. Senator McDonald.
Well, up until the last 30 seconds, I was going to ask, what is wrong with saying notwithstanding all the current use language that such facilities that feed chickens shall be eligible for current use? Because that was one of the selling points of what we're proposing an hour ago. And now it seems to be morphing into something different. So.
I think, so let me pause and let someone answer that question. I think I have a follow-on one, which is, unfortunately, we all too often treat Act 250 as though it's something worth avoiding. And my preference is always to modify Act 250 to make sure it's reasonable and functional, rather than to exempt. So, but this is a bigger conversation. I have one last quick question for Mr. O'Grady, and that is, there were issues about compost as a safe food source to have animals eating. How has that been resolved? Because there was federal code around not being able to use it.
So the federal law remains as it is. This compost is, as bill addresses it, as being brought onto a farm for production of food residuals, as this bill addresses it, as being brought onto a farm for compost production. It does not specifically say that those food residuals are feed. So the existing feed requirements remain. Farmers will have to manage those under current law. Now, at the same time, you've seen chicken, you've seen what they eat. they'll eat a rock, right? And so free range chickens will likely have access to compost piles and the food residuals in them. But the food residuals are not being imported onto a farm as feed under this bill.
All right. Well, that's definitely an ag issue. I was just curious how it got handled because that was a roadblock 2 years ago. Right. Okay. All right. So thank you everyone for running long, and we took it up on the first day of this week in order to get the ball rolling. I know there's a little more conversation yet to be had. We received a letter from someone who wants to provide testimony to us. I don't know if Stephen LaRosa spoke to the Ag Committee or not. Is that a familiar sounding name, witness name for this bill? Okay. He's scheduled on Wednesday. Okay, so thank you, everyone. It's been very helpful to